Spurge here, and in this video we are going to break down the new Arai XD-5. It's finally here. I am a perennial XD4 user. I have actually on my second XD4, this is my personal white one here on the table. I brought my original one as well. This one is filthy and dusty, and you can see the cheek pads coming out of it. But this one was well used for a solid, probably a little over 5 years. I probably stretched it too far before just picking up the white one you see on the table to replace that. And now the XD5 is here. And so many of us that have been using XD4s were waiting to see the XD5, and it's finally here. And the color in the Mojave Sage that you see on the table, this is actually the one that I have been riding in. The black one over here, Pat McHugh has been riding in. We've been putting in hours kind of comparing the two side by side. I was riding in the rain yesterday, which is why this one hasn't been cleaned off yet. But I was going back and forth between the two, trying to get all of my notes in my head. This helmet has been around since 2012, unchanged. So the fact that Arai is introducing the XD5 is a big deal. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be dazzled with a bunch of facts and figures based completely on my experience between the old outgoing helmet, the new one, as well as some of my close friends that I've talked to that are XD4 users as well. So let's start at the top and work our way through. First things first, the price has increased nearly $200. So the new XD5 in solid colors, like this lovely Mojave Sage, is coming in around the $840 price point to start. So again, I know that we've been talking about inflation a lot in some of these product videos. I think inflation is real, but I also think that maybe a $200 price increase is a little bit on the steep side. But either way, you're now looking at around $840 for this new helmet. Now, starting with the shell, it is a completely different shell. From a safety rating standpoint, it is DOT and Snell safety rated, as you'd expect from Arai. Currently just Snell 2020, while we expect it to get 2025. We'll have to keep you updated in the comments section once that happens, because it is currently just Snell 2020. The XD4 was based off the VX Pro 4 dirt bike helmet shell. I am also a VX Pro 4 owner. That is my favorite current go-to for dirt bike helmets. And the shell is now not based on that. It is a new shell. They tried to make it a little bit shorter front to back, a little bit wider on the side. They said that people were complaining about not being able to get into the VX4 as easily, and they were trying to address that. I'll get all into that in a little bit, because I don't necessarily agree with that, but we'll talk about why. So the new shell is a PBCLC2 shell. That is a peripherally belted complex laminate construction 2. This is really what we're seeing with all the new modern Arais. The XD4 was just old, and it didn't have this shell design. Now the XD5 is going to get 4 shell sizes. Extra small gets its own shell, small gets its own shell, medium and large share a shell, and extra large and 2XL share a shell. 3 intake vents. All the intake and exhaust vents have been redesigned on this. And then 4 exhaust vents, 3 pounds, 11 ounces in a medium. When we threw it on the scale, that is up about 2 ounces over the previous version. So just keep that in mind. It did get slightly heavier, but you'll see there's a lot of key changes here that probably contributed to some of that weight. Shape, still an intermediate oval head shape on this, a little bit longer front to back, a little bit narrowed on the side of the head. This is going to work for the majority of the American market. What I will say is if you're comparing the internal shape to the XD4, it does seem like you have more room around the side of your face. The cheek pads don't feel as firmly pressed in as the previous version, and a little bit more room kind of oddly in like the back area of the head compared to the previous version. So again, not exactly the same internal fit. Now, if you're not sure what we're talking about with internal fit, maybe you're new to riding or you've just never properly sized up a helmet before, you can always check out our How to Size and Buy a Motorcycle Helmet guide, which walks you through how to look at your head shape. What I will note with Arai is that Arai's helmets, whether you're looking at something like the Quantum or the XD5 or the VX Pro 4, everyone has a slightly different internal shape to it. So it's just something to note with Arai's line. Typically, I fit in like 80% of their helmets. There's always 1 or 2 that throw me off. So the internal fitment on this is slightly different, and it's not necessarily as comfortable, in my opinion, as the XD4 if you really found the XD4 to be comfortable. So let's walk through what is new and what has changed, because even just looking at the two helmets side by side, they don't look the same. The look has changed. This old XD4 definitely has more of a traditional kind of dirt bike helmet look to it, whereas the XD5, I think Arai is going after a little bit more of the adventure rider that's spending maybe the majority of their time on the street. And the most notable change for the positive is the face shield. So one of the biggest issues with the XD4 was that the face shield on this didn't accept pin lock. It was weird and convexed in a way that kind of altered vision. You could still use goggles, and most of us chose to use goggles with this, but it just wasn't a great face shield. So they fixed that. The face shield now accepts pin lock, comes with pin lock in the box. When you open it up all the way, the two little pointy pieces don't sit down in your field of vision like they did with the XD4. It is just a better face shield. It doesn't distort. It is, I would say, 100% better than what we had with the XD4. The vent on the front of this does vent slightly more air subjectively, or maybe it's objectively, if you are riding it side by side with the XD4. And there is now a little screw so you can remove the vent and you can clean it, which was a frustrating point on the XD4 as well. So you can go in there and you can pull this off and you can clean it out. Vents a massive amount of air to your face on this. So if you're somebody that runs hot in the summertime, that's going to be fixed for you. Now, one of the bigger issues that was part of the XD4 was the fact that the peak, you needed two kind of screws on each side to remove it and to change the face shield. So what they've done is they've altered that. You can change the face shield, you can remove the face shield without having to remove the whole side system. The other thing to note here too is that with one screw, you can remove the peak and you can run it with just the face shield. So you can kind of turn this into a full face helmet, and we'll show you that with a B-roll shot of what it looks like with the peak removed. Now the peak on this is completely redesigned. I want to start by saying, and this is where it gets to be, my opinion, I wish that the peak would have been color matched. You see it with the black one, you see it with, I believe, the white one. Certain colors get the color matched peak, other ones don't. So I love the Mojave Sage color. I just wish that the spoiler and the peak were all done in the same color, so it was very reminiscent of what I would have seen on my XD4 in the past. Even my older one, the peak and everything was color matched in the same way of the helmet. So I'm not particularly a huge fan of the contrasting black over the Mojave Sage. That being said, none of that really matters in the performance of the helmet. The peak on this was redesigned, and I don't think it is any better at not grabbing your head and kind of pulling it, especially when you're checking your six. In fact, I think this actually grabs a little bit more in the wind than the previous version, which surprised me because there was a whole massive amount of airflow that is now allowed to pass through, unlike the previous version on this. But I did find that, when I was going back to check if someone was behind me, it seemed to grab a little bit more, and that was slightly disappointing. The other thing to note is it gets the new Arai logo, which has the vent built in, and then it loses the vents that are actually on the face shield itself. I do not find that this vent works any better than the previous vents. They did say that they moved that vent there to help with a little bit of airflow, and then they got rid of the two vents up top, and they just went with one solo vent. And again, I don't find that it vents any better than the previous version. I'm not saying it vents any worse, but it definitely doesn't vent any better, and I do miss having those little brow mounts on the top. Now, what I will say is if I'm using this and I'm just looking at the face shield, I like the new face shield better, to the point where I'm willing to sacrifice those two vents at the face shield because it is a much better face shield. Coming around to the back, you'll notice if you're looking at the back of the old one, there was no real spoiler. You just had these vents with these covers and a little actuator right there, and then one on the other side. This now has a spoiler with a unified switch to control both of your exhaust vents on this. Part of this was done, they said, to reduce turbulence and make it a more aerodynamic fit. Maybe that's true if you take this peak off, but like I said earlier, I think with the peak on there, it's no more aerodynamic than the previous version. One of the other notes here too is that Arai, I missed my donut. that Arai changed the shape of the way the helmet was designed. So when we talked about the shell earlier, they were getting complaints apparently that the helmet was too narrow and too hard to get into as it stood. So what they did was they made it a little bit wider on the side, and then they made it a little bit shorter front to back. And here's my complaint. My complaint is, in my opinion, now it's harder to get into. So despite the fact that they made more room on the side, because it's shorter front to back, it's awkward trying to get it on, and now the chin bar sits directly against my face, and the old one didn't do that. So I am not a fan of how short this has become, just in the way that it sits against my chin, and I find it a little bit more awkward getting it on and off. Now, what I will say is if you are someone that felt like the old cheek pads were too tight, these definitely have more room in them. The cheek pads are not nearly as contoured to fit directly against your cheeks. I was talking to Pat McHugh earlier, who was helping me test this, and he goes, well, couldn't you just get thicker cheek pads? You can. Arai does a great job of having thicker cheek pads in their lineup, but I think that's going to then get you right back to the problem of the previous version. So what I did was I tested a like-for-like XD4 against an XD5. I didn't go into swapping cheek pads or anything like that. You can change the cheek pads, but as it sits right now, the cheek pads were just a little bit looser on the lower part of my jaw, a little bit tighter back up on the further part of my jaw. And then the real issue there is that it really increased wind noise. So when I was riding in this next to the XD4, it was no quieter, and if anything, it was probably a little bit louder. And I am someone that typically does not complain about wind noise, but it was noticeable at highway speeds. And highway speeds, I was going anywhere from, with traffic, 40 miles an hour to open highway, 70, 80 miles an hour. And at both speeds, you can definitely hear the wind a little bit louder than with the XD4. And that was with the face shield completely closed. So the one main change you'll see here is with the old version, there used to be a little cutout in the cheek pad itself, and that would allow for the speakers to sit in there. So what they've done with this one is they've now got a proper speaker pocket, and there's a little Velcro piece that comes out, and you can see you've now got this channeled cutout in there, which is a new thing. We've not seen this before with the XD4. It was always just putting the speaker pocket into the cheek pad. So that's now a cutout, and it's a nice, big, deep cutout. So you can easily fit some of the new thicker Harman Kardon speakers. The cheek pads, while they've been redesigned, it's still the Arai style where you have this little plastic tab that kind of slides in, and then the back one just pops into place. So there's no snapping or anything. You just have to get used to doing this. And the first couple times you remove an Arai cheek pad, it's a challenge. But once you get used to it, I like this. I like the fact that there's no snaps. You'll notice that the cover is removable. So if you want to, you can take this off and just wash the cover. If you're riding this in an off-road situation, chances are you're removing the liner, you're removing the cheek pads, and you're washing it off more often than not. I'm not going to pull the whole chin curtain out on this, or not the chin curtain. I'm not going to pull the whole neck roll out, but I am going to unsnap the internal liner. And you'll see with this one, you have two snaps off to the side of the head. And then typically we don't like to see this, but what I found with Arai is they put enough foam padding behind it that you do not notice those snaps, and it remains to be quite comfortable. Pretty sophisticated in its design for the liner. You get some adjustment with the liner as well if you want to kind of move that around. With the back, you can see there's two different points there. You can adjust exactly how that sits and how that fits. They have different liners, and you can fine-tune the fitment if you like. And Arai does a pretty good job of labeling all of their liners, so you can kind of mix and match if you want to find the right fit for your head. The final note with the inside of this, and I failed to mention this earlier, but you can kind of see it here, is that there is that traditional Arai drop down. So this is something that you're going to see on all their helmets. That kind of little chin curtain piece drops down. So once you get the helmet on, you can choose whether to pull that down or not. Just taking a look at the inside, no real channeled cutouts in the shell, just the two holes at the front and the one at the top. And like I said, I don't find that the airflow on this to be any better than the airflow on the previous version, outside of that chin vent. I do think that that chin vent is a big step in the right direction. So, too long didn't read, right? If you're thinking about this, if you are a fan of the XD4 and this was a helmet that you gravitated to and bought a second one, this XD5 is going to be a change. It's not going to be everything you loved about the old one carried over. It's not going to have the same things you griped about with the old one carried over. They addressed certain things and they improved certain things, in my opinion. Other things they addressed, and I don't necessarily see it as an improvement. For those of you that have never worn an XD4 before in your life and you're coming at the XD5 completely new, you're probably not looking at it the same way. And maybe some of these complaints that I'm noticing as a fan of the XD4, you're not even going to notice. Or maybe your head shape is slightly different than mine and you put it on and it's not an issue. But for those of you out there that have been asking for a direct side-by-side comparison of the XD4, like I said, huge fan of the XD4, really excited to try the XD5, and just a couple areas where I would have liked to have seen them take a slightly different approach. That being said, this is going to be a helmet that a lot of people out there are riding in. And if you want to hear more about what those people have to say, you can always click the info button on your desktop or mobile device. You can read other rider reviews from folks that are already out there using the XD5 on their rides. If you have more questions as to which adventure bike helmet is right for you and your riding style, you can always reach out to one of our customer service reps. They can walk you through all the different helmets available to make sure that you find the right adventure helmet to match with the bike and the style that you're looking to tackle. So I want to thank you for joining us today for this look at the Arai XD-5. I'm Spurge. Enjoy the ride.